Έχω τη χαρά να καλέσω στο βήμα τον κύριο Andreas Pollner, Managing Director της Bayer Ελλάς και του Pharma Cluster Ελλάδας, Κύπρου, Βουλγαρίας και Ρουμανίας, ταμεία του Pharma Innovation Forum, ο οποίος θα μας μιλήσει σήμερα με θέμα η φαρμακευτική βιομηχανία και το transformation, το ψηφιακό transformation στην εποχή του COVID. Mr. Pollner, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very good event. I hope you can hear me quite fine, because today the internet connection is not so stable.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Very nice. So I have also brought some slides which I would like to share with you. I think some of the speakers had already touched on a couple of topics which are extremely relevant for the pharma industry and the COVID situation. Please, the slides. Wonderful. I think what has been said already in one of the speeches is that we have seen a catalytic event with the COVID crisis for the pharmaceutical industry and its digital transformation. Some were saying that basically COVID was the best chief information officer for all the pharmaceutical companies and for many companies throughout the world. Now, when we look at the current development of especially chronic diseases are increasing as the aging population is increasing. And because of this, we will also see in the future an increasing burden of society by diseases and the healthcare status. At the same time, digitalization has started to strongly influence all areas of our value chain in the pharma industry. That is clearly driven by the different technologies coming from artificial intelligence used in diagnostics to all the other areas that we have seen when it comes to treatment support, or also combining computer processing for many of the activities. So what we clearly see is that we are now in a transformational status. Next slide, please. So what we see here is definitely that there are many supporting technologies at hand for this journey. This journey hasn't started with COVID, and you all know this. This journey has started kind of a decade ago. Nevertheless, many of these new technologies were not so much on our agenda. We all know that there were first steps related to artificial intelligence early on. However, nobody was really trusting so much how this could work. I would like to highlight here, however, two elements. The one is software as a medical device and the DIY diagnostics. I think both together are creating a new ecosystem for healthcare professionals, for patients, and also other stakeholders like the caregivers. What we clearly have seen is with the right software, with the developments, for example, in our diagnostic activities in Bayer, this has increased the accuracy, this has increased also the availability of data and individualized treatments with minimum invasion. On the other hand, when you look at the activities regarding diagnostic and virtual care, this is something which has dramatically changed over the past 3 to 4 years. Many of you may have followed the latest technologies where devices like smart watches are already starting to measure the oxygen levels in the blood and can perform ECGs. Now, this is a trend which is definitely continuing, and I believe that this is also something where we can see a lot of possibilities for private-public partnerships, which are to further drive this for society. Now, let me come to the next slide. When it comes to the COVID pandemic, and I think we've discussed that already in some of the speeches, there were a number of observations. And here, this is from a study from Accenture after basically the first wave of COVID. What has changed for healthcare professionals? And for healthcare professionals worldwide, many things have changed. So first of all is that clearly the changes in COVID and the changes due to COVID will last. Many of the operating models will last, whether it is here in Greece or in other healthcare markets. So this is a fundamental change in the way how our healthcare markets and environments will work, will collaborate, and will also function. On the other hand, when we see at other findings, is clearly that we as pharma companies need to support the HCPs in a different way, because they have a reduced number of visits by patients. We don't know yet if this will be sustainable. However, we know that patients have a different view now on the channels that they use for getting in contact with the doctors. We have heard before that it might be now much more usual to do virtual engagements. And this is basically the third finding, that not only the pharma sales reps are now doing much more virtual engagements, everybody's doing that, from the patients to the authorities to the HCPs. So we clearly establish a much more virtual ecosystem that is important for this. And I think it is also something which is supported by the HCPs. Many doctors prefer, and the number that we have here is around 60%, really prefer a higher level of autonomous, self-administered working of the patient supported by digital tools. So this is clearly a shift from some of the activities from the HCPs to the patients and the caregivers. Next slide, please. One thing that we clearly observed in Greece was that there are a number of factors that had an immediate impact on the non-COVID impacted patients. And especially these patients are chronic patients. Chronic patients had the situation that their normally planned routines were completely destroyed. There were not anymore any security on how to plan activities in their same plans. We clearly saw that the ER situations in most countries were overwhelmed. We clearly saw that the whole situation for especially elective surgeries has changed completely. This is something which might sound okay, as you say, it's an elective surgery. However, all this together has a strong influence on the psychological behavior of the patients. What we've seen now is that a high degree of patients who have chronic diseases and who need treatment are now out of the offices and not getting to their treatments. So this is a big challenge, and this is not something which has been solved yet. In addition, despite the fact that we have seen a lot of activities virtually when it comes to diagnostic activities, it is not enough, because many patients still fear that they could get either infected or somehow impacted by COVID in case they go for any diagnostic steps to hospitals or practices. This is critical because we see that there are many patients now with undiagnosed treatment situations, and this is something which we need to change, and this requires also a joint effort and combination of digital and more traditional activities to increase the awareness that this case of danger is not given. The psychological safety here is a topic. Coming to the next topic is obviously the patient. As I spoke about it, we clearly see that for many patients, the change in technology is something which has been dramatically changed now through COVID. It has been started already in 2 to 3 years ago, when we had first smaller startups, but also bigger corporations who were looking into this. They were looking, for example, into caregiving elements when it comes to monitoring, for example, seniors, or when it comes to also monitoring of risk patients. Nevertheless, what we clearly see is that with the COVID, now 60% of the patients are interested in the way to communicate differently. What we've also seen is that it is possible for the patients, together with their HCPs, to build a kind of a trust relationship virtually. This is something which you do when you do basically a virtual treatment. And we spoke about telemedicine. In telemedicine, we are just starting the possibilities that are there for pharma companies, HCPs, for also service providers. And this might be service providers which are not traditional pharma companies. We have seen a number of countries here in Europe, like the Scandinavian countries, who are more advanced in this. It is obvious that Greece is a country that offers a lot in this area, where we need to reach patients who are in remote geographic areas, or where we would like to make sure that also the coverage of HCP and health services is much broader. So in this sense, COVID has helped us to accelerate this idea and provide more of this. Coming to the next point, I think what it brings to all of us is that now is a momentum which we have to further use. This momentum means that we can build much more on an integration between digital care, between HCPs who would like to have the information that is relevant for them in treating their patients at a finger point, and we can also clearly look into a different way of engaging. I think there are three elements very important. The first one is clearly commitment, because this commitment means also that it must be a sustainable service to patients and the healthcare community. The other element, which many of us experienced, is the lack of human engagement. So some people may think that digital and human engagement are contradiction. I think it's not contradicting. It is much more a combination of both, which will allow us then also bring this forward. And all this in the end leads to a different level of engagement. I would like to finalize with 2 or 3 points which we can see what can we do in the future out of the situation with COVID. And I would like to come to my next slide. So looking at the next slide, please. It is clear that across, and I think this is in Europe, in all countries, across the countries, and especially also in Greece, we can much more expand support services. We have seen that a COVID situation has changed the traditional setups and the traditional support schemes and infrastructures that we have in the society. Now it is necessary that we can have a much more faster, much more independent way of starting from diagnostic activities to day-to-day support and coming to the more, let's say, preventive measures and expand this service. We clearly see that the risk groups in the society were not discussed so much, and therefore it is important that we drive this all together. This brings us to the point of partnerships, and what you see here is, in this slide, that we in Greece have already created an ecosystem of a lot of interesting startup companies that can contribute to digital healthcare, like Dr. Anytime, which have transformed their platform during the COVID crisis also to an area where you can do virtual treatment appointments, or the level of Collaborate Health Cloud that helps a lot to ensure that the collaboration of doctors in the patient treatment is furthermore engaged and increased. Let me just end with the outlook that we are doing at Bayer at the moment. So in the next slide, you will see that we at Bayer have a number of companies with whom we have cooperated, with whom we cooperate, and whom we have partly acquired in engaging in self-care and consumer health. So what we've seen clearly is that platforms like CareOff or OneDrop are platforms that allow a different level of engagement of patients and HCPs to change the behavior of patients. What we've seen very often when it comes to prevention, when it comes to accurate diagnosis, all this needs required or is required by the support of digital tools. These platforms have a much more advanced level of preventive measures, influencing the behavior, the lifestyle behaviors, but also the adherence and compliance with the different levels of treatments. They also help to exchange between healthcare professionals and the patients in a level that overall drive a better outcome for the individuals. In the end, what we believe is that this will create a much better level of personalized treatment. So with that, I would like to thank you for having the chance to share these thoughts, and I'm very much looking forward to the more in-depth discussions that follow from my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Pollner. Ήταν μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλία, από την οποία θα κρατήσω δύο πράγματα. Το πρώτο είναι ότι η τεχνολογία παρέχει τη δυνατότητα για ψηφιακό μετασχηματισμό των παρεχόμενων υπηρεσιών και το δεύτερο είναι ότι οι ασθενείς, οι καταναλωτές των προϊόντων που παράγει ο τομέας της υγείας θέλουν την ψηφιοποίηση, την μετεξέλιξη του τρόπου διάθεσης των υπηρεσιών αυτών. Το πρόκριμα είναι, το στίχημα είναι για το σύνολο των παρόχων να μπορέσουν να αξιοποιήσουν τις δυνατότητες της τεχνολογίας και σε συνδυασμό με την επιθυμία των καταναλωτών να έχουν πιο ψηφιακές υπηρεσίες, να μπορέσουν να προχωρήσουν στο επόμενο βήμα. Και η πανδημία νομίζω ότι είναι μια πολύ καλή ευκαιρία να ξεκινήσει η ολοκλήρωση αυτής της διαδικασίας.